Today, it is my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce Professor Biao Xiang and to once again virtually welcome him to Cornell University. When I began planning this lecture series on China and migration, he was at the very top of my list for reasons that I'll get into in just a moment. Professor Xiang is professor of social anthropology at Oxford University, and he has a relatively new appointment at the Max Planck Institute, where he's heading a new department there on the anthropology of economic experimentation. And he's actually joining us today from Germany. Professor Xiang is one of the preeminent scholars of Chinese migration, both domestically and internationally. Perhaps the preeminent scholar, but it's not just China. He is a scholar of migration in general, and his work is widely respected by migration scholars, people working on areas all over the world. He's done research not just in China, making his mark looking at sort of internal migration within China, then looking at the international Chinese diaspora, but he's also done research in India and other countries as well. I can't possibly list all of his many important publications. He's written numerous books, countless articles. They've been translated into all kinds of articles. Any student of migration is really going to have to reckon with his work at some point. And so I'm extremely excited to be able to invite him here today to present some of his new work on reproductive labor. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And now I will turn it over to Professor Xiang.
Okay, thank you very much, Ali. First of all, thanks the program, thanks Amala for organizing, setting up this seminar. And I would like to say big thanks to Ali for at least 3 reasons. Number one, for inviting me here. Number two, he just told me that he likes the title, the term that I'm using today, reproduction migration. And as I just told him, he is the first person who gave me positive feedback on this concept, because I discussed this concept in a few other places, and people say, oh, it's interesting, but still confusing and misleading. So the encouragement from him is very important for me at this point of work. You're still exploring, you get confused by yourself. And thirdly, when I mentioned to Ali that I wish to talk about reproduction migration, and in order to address one particular empirical puzzle, which is why Chinese citizens continue leaving China, exiting China, when China is becoming the global economic center. China is a place where money is being made, why people are keeping living. And he immediately reminded me, oh, you should again look at Saskia Sason's 1986 book, The Mobility of Capital and Labor, because Saskia Sason asked a very similar question at that time, 1980s, namely, there's 2 questions for her. Number one, why the increasing number of migrants coming to the US at that time were from countries like such countries as South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, and a number of Latin American countries where they were going through quite a rapid industrialization, where the living standards were increasing. Number 2 puzzle, why did they come to the US when US was going through an unemployment crisis? There were no jobs. If you look at the statistics, it's not good time. US was going through deindustrialization. So why do you have people moving from industrializing nations into deindustrializing places? That was Saskia Sason's question. And I didn't think of that before. It was Ali who reminded me of that book, and then I went back to rethink about that. I read the book many years ago, but I never made the connection between the book and what I'm thinking now. Then now I have a framework. At least the initial framework. Thanks for the Ali's reference to Saskia Sason. Now, our question is similar to what Saskia Sisson asked, as I mentioned, but the answer is quite different. Saskia Sisson's answer to the 1980s puzzle was the internationalization of production. She made a few interesting points. Number one, she said, okay, when now you look at the migration, you should not consider migration as a process where people move from one country where there's no jobs to a place that has more jobs to offer. No, you have to look at the global system as a whole. You have the internationalization of production, which means there's a rapid capital movement from the core, the West, into these countries like South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and Latin America, like Mexico, and etc. Right? The arrival of capital, of course, encouraged industrialization and encouraged the economic growth, but at the same time, the foreign investment also disrupted the traditional livelihoods. So therefore, it creates large-scale displacement of workers. So you have large-scale displacement workers, especially men, at the same time as economic development. And this displaced men have to go somewhere. So therefore, they become potential migrants. That hypothesis is not very well approved. But anyway, that was an interesting hypothesis, right? This is the number one answer. And then she says, okay, then why do migrants coming to the US despite of deindustrialization? And she says, again, you should look at the internationalization of production. Internationalization of production, in today's language, we will call it globalization, requires certain strategic hub in the world as a commanding site, which will coordinate all the flows of capital, flow of goods, and the flow of information. And these commanding sites are what she called global cities. Mainly it's New York, Los Angeles, and of course, Tokyo and London. These are major global cities. So global cities are just not simply big cities or international cities, but global cities are the strategic site where globalization project is being designed, monitored, and shaped. In these global cities, you need new people. Who are these new people? Two types. Type one, high-end finance analysts, IT professionals, which subject I also worked on before. Look at that Indian IT programmers going to Australia and the US. Why do they need IT? It's not simply a linear or incremental technological upgrading. IT is needed as a global infrastructure to facilitate new mode of capital circulation. So therefore, the need of IT, as Ellie mentioned, is spatially uneven. So in certain places, you will need more than other places. That's a high end. And at the same time, Saskia Sisson said, in global cities, you also have increasing demand for informal, low-end laborers, cleaners, cooks, sex workers, to provide the service for this high-fly elite, these finance analysts, etc. So both of them actually are in short supply, so therefore need migrant workers from the rising global south. So that was her answer. And the first hypothesis, the displacement hypothesis actually is, I think, still remain to be tested. But the second hypothesis about the global city thesis, we know it is well accepted. And then what's the situation in China today? Why do Chinese people are leaving China when China is not only simply industrializing, but China is become a global hub for financial speculation, for wealth, for strategic wealth accumulation? So my answer is, it's no longer internationalization of production. I mean, if we go to detail, actually can make an interesting comparison, because the internationalization of production or material production did not encourage out-migration. The globalization of production actually, you create many more jobs in China. I mean, in China, you don't see massive kind of economic displacement. Of course, you see large scale rural-urban migrants. There's a social displacement, but primarily it's a story of economic employment generation. So that did not encourage out-migration. The reason, the driving force behind of out-migration now is what I call the internationalization of reproduction strategies. What is a reproduction? I mean, let's go back to the very simple definition by Eagles. And Marx didn't say too much about it. It's basically the maintenance and of human life, right? Workers, you have to go home to eat and sleep in order to have energy refueled and for tomorrow's work. I mean, then in order to do that, you need someone cook for the workers, you need someone to clean the house. And of course, you need having second generation to be born and etc. So this is the whole social process of that sustain the production of labor, sustain the production system, which we call a social reproduction. So maintain our life at both individual level as well as intergenerational level, social reproduction. And what do I mean? The internationalization of reproduction. If you look at who are leaving China today, I mean, the fastest growing number of migrants from China, number one, students. Of course, this is well known, especially in campus like Cornell. China is the world number one sending country of international students. I mean, China now also attract some foreign students, but most of the students going to China are for short-term exchange programs, not for degree. So it's less serious in some words. And the number two, fastest growing migrants from China are so-called investor migrants, right? We know in US, you have this EB-5, I think, visa. At a certain year, I think 2017, is more than 80% of the EB-5 visas were issued to PRC applicants. And a similar situation were observed in Canada, Australia, although these countries now became quite cautious or even closed down this program. Mainly because there's a concern about having too many Chinese, wealthy Chinese come. So there's a social backlash there. But at the same time, we witnessed, I mean, not too large, but quite a few small countries, especially in Europe, but also in Latin America, open up these schemes. The most famous examples, including Portugal, Malta, and Hungary. So this is quite unlikely, and Greece, and very unlikely destinations in the traditional migration flows. But now they became quite popular destinations because they have this investment migration scheme, according to which, as long as you invest a certain amount of money, so you can get a green card. But what kind of investments are the Chinese investor migrants make? Properties. I mean, there's a very few cases where they invest money in productive activities to hire people and etc. But the main investments they make is by the family house, family properties. So then also there's a small number of labor migration, and I want to make argument that labor migration after 2000s, according to my field work in Northeast China, is also becoming increasingly reproduction driven, meaning that they migrate is not only just to earn money and go home to make investment, in order to become rich, but they migrate often the direct pressure of getting married, buying a property. I mean, they are related. If you don't buy a property in cities, a country boy even can't find a country girl. If both families are now in the rural China, but in order for them to get married, the young men are expected to have a property in the county seat. And the requirement is quite high. It's not only a property in the county seat, but it must be a particular location, and the condominium must have certain facilities and etc. So it's a tremendous pressure in the domain of reproduction. You have a family house, you get married, and of course, education cost and the medical care cost. I mean, there's a very complex reason behind that. Why is the cost increasing so high? So in the 1990s, the people migrate to earn money, and then they go back to buy houses. So the price of houses goes up. So people blame migrants. But in the recent years, people don't blame migrants for sending back remittances, therefore raising the property prices. Because now the picture is opposite, is the property prices keep rising, driven by domestic political economy, land policy, and urban growth, and etc. And therefore it pushes many young people to migrate in order to make quick savings. I mean, the wage overseas is not necessarily higher than China, but by going overseas, you can save money more quickly. Partly because you work much long hours and you don't have socialization. And when you go overseas, you basically work 7 days a week, at least 10 hours a day. So you can make a saving quicker, and then you can buy a apartment before the price become unaffordable, and then you can secure a marriage and etc. And also, there are more and more people migrate because of the education fee. So that's probably, yeah, we can come back this later, because people can say, okay, labor migration are always migrating for reproductive concern. They send the money back to build a house or to pay medical cost. But the picture here is slightly different. It's not that they are going out to earn supplemental incomes for reproductive purpose. But actually, the main driving force is that the obligation, the pressure to meet such reproductive duties are so high. So they just have to go. So they become so that's driven by reproduction concerns. But that is a relatively minor case in my story. So what I really want to focus on is the students, migrants, and investor migrants as a main case of this reproduction migration. Then, as I just mentioned now, most people say, oh, it's very confusing. Why do you call that the reproduction migration? So here today, I need your help. And I wanted to try to justify a bit why I use this term. And you can tell me whether or not it works. First of all, why do we use such a broad category, reproduction? Why don't we just do educational migration, or call it lifestyle migration, or consumption migration, right? Which sounds somehow is empirically more self-evident, kind of easier to understand. But reproduction for me is a very important category. It is true, it's a kind of abstraction. It is not empirically self-evident, but nevertheless, it is a necessary and important abstraction. This again go back to egos and Marx, especially egos, the origin of a family, private property, and the state. What do humans do in this world? The human do two things. Number one, human produce things to food and clothes, etc. Produce things in order to survive. Number two, human must reproduce a human as a species. The first part of production actually marks, I'll talk and develop such a sophisticated theory to talk about how production is socially organized, different ways how you organize a production have very different consequences and etc. But I think actually reproduction is even more complex than that. If you look at the reproduction just as a biological fact, there's no big difference between human and any mammals. But the problem, of course, is the social aspect of reproduction. How this biological production is programmed, organized socially, marriage system, kinship, family, inheritance, and then your identity and the community, right? And then you have welfare system, the state, and the public education, private education, all the debates, healthcare, which is really dominating our concerns in contemporary society, is much more about the reproduction than about the production. If you ask ordinary people, what is they really worried about? Of course, they're taught now by economists that says, oh, and the most important thing is the economy. You have to look at employment data. This is quite the case in China. If you go to people, educated people will talk like that. You look at the economy, look at what trade, look at what the US do. But if you talk to the less educated people who are much wiser, who tell you the truth in a much more economical way, it is primarily about the reproduction. Why education becomes so expensive, so tiring, pension. Why is it difficult to see a doctor and expensive to see a doctor, 看病难, 看病贵, etc. So the social, what I want to say is that the reproduction is in a way very simple, right? Just keep life going and then keep having second generation, keep them alive. But there's a specific way how it is socially organized is very changed dramatically over the last 200 years globally, but mostly I think in the last 100 years. We know it is in Europe, is probably in Germany here, Bismarck, and then you have poor law. Of course, primarily after Second World War, you have the social reproduction became a political agenda. And then how, that is, I think, is a very important domain, right, for us to examine various social issues. So therefore, I use the term reproduction migration as opposed to reproductive migration. Reproductive, the word sounds quite descriptive and sounds like is to really emphasize particular function of migration. The students' migration and investor migration are not necessarily reproductive. Reproductive word, I don't know. But they belong to the category, the domain of reproduction, right? So that is similar to, the usage of terms by Marx. It's about production force instead of productive force. Lots of production force are not necessarily productive, but productive, how to measure it? It is a more functional description rather than analytical category. The productive or reproductive is a function, is to describe the function rather than analysis about its position in the organization of the society and the economy. So this is why I think, okay, reproduction migration, by having these big categories, it is meaningful, and probably it is a time to bring back some big categories like that. And the second is reason, I think, second reason why reproduction migration, why reproduction migration can be confusing is precisely because Reproduction, I mean, when people start talking about the social reproduction seriously in the 1960s, it was very much about the discovery of women's contribution to capitalist system, is a rediscovery of the household in the capitalist system. And people ask, okay, because all the political economy is talking about politics in the factory, talking about the labor exploitation in the production side. But how can this labor being exploited had not someone else produced this labor on a daily basis in the first place, as well as in the generational basis? Of course, the mothers and the wives, the inputs are extremely important. So the suppression of women is not only about ideational and gender, sex politics, but it's really about this public and the private divide. It's about the production and the reproduction divide. So the discovery of reproduction is very much about the rediscovery of the so-called private sphere and its political and economic functions to the whole system, right? I mean, so the feminist argument, whether or not these heteronormative families, at least among the working class, is inevitable. The answer is no, it is not inevitable. This is a particular way how social reproduction is organized, the heteronormative families, right? So that's then this at least generate an impression that reproduction is something home, is something rooted, is something that actually less mobile. Labor is mobile and the reproduction is not mobile, which is very true for a long history. What is a typical image of a labor migrant? Of course, it's a man leaving home for the cities to work and send the remittances back in the countryside where the wives, children, and the elderly stay. Home in the countryside is where reproduction takes place, and the cities, the factories are where productive activities take place, right? So therefore, the mobile part is the man. So the main theoretical discussion was about that since 60s, 70s. But today, the situation changed greatly. A very typical image actually was very nicely provided by the anthropologist Eva Ong. She was talking about the different cases, more about Hong Kong and Taiwan middle-class families migrating to Canada since the 1980s. Who are the migrants? On the paper, the migrants, yes, are the men, head of household, migrating to Canada from Hong Kong or Taiwan. Who are actually migrating? The wives and the children, sometimes their parents as well. They go to Canada because life is much easier. The grass is greener, the air is much better quality, and of course, education is better. So who are staying home? The men. The men stay in Hong Kong, Taiwan, of course, now China. Why? Because this is where the money is made. China is a center of capital accumulation. The West is a site of reproduction. This is just one aspect. Then you have other aspects in the reproduction, social reproduction we know is no longer confined at a private home at all. So there's a discussion in China after reform, whether or not reproduction, social reproduction is privatized. The picture is fuzzy. On one hand, you can say it is privatized because the state withdraw, the factories will not provide any kindergartens, the nursing and education are supposed to be taken up by families. So therefore, lots of women workers were laid off and etc. But at the same time, are they really privatized? No. We see dramatic expansion of the market that meet this production need, right? And the tuition, the private school, etc. In Northeast China, countryside, a new phenomenon that I observed, I was surprised. It is common now in countryside, no matter how poor it is common to send the preschool children to kindergarten in the county seat cities. Countryside kids go to kindergarten. This is quite surprising to me. So of course, this have all kinds of consequences. We know that in countryside, child, of course, before 5 they are child. After 5 they be a de facto child labor. They do all kinds of household chores and etc. This is a part of family system. I mean, we can make a certain moral argument about labor, child labor, etc. This again is a complex story. But now it's very clear that of course not the child labor. They have become a major consumption item. In Jilin province, private kindergarten, I mean, there's no public kindergarten in county seat that can take ordinary peasants' children. There's only 1 or 2 public kindergartens, which are all all the seats are taken by the cadres already. So the rest are private. Is about 1,000 yuan tuition fee a month. Huge cash burden, huge cash burden. We know how much cash peasants earn a year. Peasants can have certain wealth, if you count all the orange tree and etc. But how much cash they can get at the end of the year. But this one, the kindergarten alone, every month money goes cash, 1,000 goes out straight away. So that type of pressure related to reproduction is very high. So here I'm talking about, it's not purely privatized by taken up by families. So you have women go home and women become housewives again. That was debated in 1980s. But now what we witnessed, actually, a much more powerful trend is really the monetization or marketization of reproduction. So this is the second big point I want to raise here to justify why I want to use the term reproduction migration. The second point is that reproduction, the specific way how reproduction is organized changed greatly. And this on one hand make it looks quite odd to have reproduction migration, because reproduction is supposed to be tied at home. Why do you migrate? In order to reproduce. But this is precisely, I think it's interesting. You have now an internationalized strategy of reproduction. You send the kids overseas for education. You want to, of course, I mean, for security of assets, etc. The overseas, and there is that kind of plan as well, inheritance. You want to have better air and better, safer food and etc. So that's I think is so you look, if we think of that way, it may open up some new space or raise new questions for thinking of the political economy of China or China's relation to the world. And then people say, oh, well, what about the consumption migration or lifestyle migration? I think there are all specific cases of reproduction migration. But these concepts are not very satisfactory for me, because consumption itself is a very specific, I would say, ideological representation of reproduction. I mean, why do you call reproduction consumption? Reproduction is what life is about. I mean, we are human beings, we come here, we want to keep our life. Why do you call this education, medical care as item of consumption? This is not a neutral description, and it is ideologically loaded. And also it's empirically, analytically confusing, right? I mean, why is you want to go somewhere to have a better air? Of course, you pay money to do that. Why is that? Is that a consumption, or it is actually a way to create a new exclusion? And is, you have can have a different way to analyze, to describe that. So there's lots of some terms seemingly self-evident, but actually can be confusing, right? So that's why I want to use the term reproduction migration. is wanted to see how this migration, the reproductive migration, sorry, how this type of migration is telling us about some larger changes in the global economy. One hypothesis arising from here is that whether or not China is becoming a global center. Probably it's not. It is a global center for material production, but it is not a global center for human reproduction. So the West is the center of reproduction. Then if we do a political economy analysis, okay, who is earning more money and what is the source of value? Probably reproduction is a much more important source of profit than material production. So whether or not we should rethink the world economy now in terms of reproduction activities instead of material production. So that is one question. Now, in the second half of I was advised to have a break to keep you awake, but I will just carry on to see if you feel dozy away. That's fine too. Then I hope to finish the whole the talk early, then we have more discussion. The second part, I just go back to history. I understand that this whole series, Empire of Migrants, started with the history, probably will end with some historical review and a comparison. I want to look at the history of how should we locate this stream of reproduction migration that emerged mainly in 1990s. Actually, I would say it emerged from 1980s, maybe a little controversial. In the long history, I divided China's migration, global migration, into 4 stages. In each stages, there is a particular relation between mobility and capital accumulation. Stage 1, 1840 to 1950. So, the forced to open up, Opium War, large wave of indentured labor to Southeast Asia, Latin America, and North America as well. That was primarily outer migration driven by European capital expansion. Here's a term I use here. I mean, this is not my term, but used by historians as well. Expansion as opposed to accumulation. Expansion is related to colonialism. You go to new space. It's not you're accumulating like a classical capitalist system in the Marxist picture, but you just go a new place, right, through extractive economy, plantation, and etc. So the stage 1 is labor outer migration driven by European capital expansion. Stage 2, sorry, I said 4 stages, actually it's 3 stages. Stage 2 is from 1950 to 1980, right, a Cold War time. 2 things happened. Number 1, China basically stopped outer migration. Actually, they also stopped the internal migration, except this, down up to mountain, down to village movements, and etc. The internal migration, as well as international migration, stopped. This is one thing during that Cold War period. Second thing is quite important too. It was during the Cold War period that we witnessed the establishment of international labor migration system, including the migration of labor from South Asia, first of all, to Europe, as well to the Middle East, immediately after the Second World War, and then the so-called guest worker program. And then you have migration from South Asia, as well as Korea, to the Middle East because it's oil boom. And then you have in the 1960s, US also opened up and gave up the country quota system. You have Asian migration, large number from India going to North America, of course, Australia as well. So you have this international, and then this leads to what Saskia Sassen described in 1980s migration from Southeast Asia to the US tied to the movement of capital. So you have the establishment of the international labor migration system. I want to say these two things are probably related. E-mobility in China and the international mobility led by the West, they are related. They are related in the sense it is precisely because China was cast out from the global system. So the small states, especially those surrounding China, Southeast Asia, were actively encouraged and also incorporated into the global system, economic system, which was clearly dominated by the US at that time. So that is, I mean, controversial explanation, but for me, it's interesting explanation for the Asian dragons and tigers. They become dragon and tigers because of China was outside of the system. So the West need, I mean, it's part of geopolitical in-circle strategy, but it's part also because the economic force in play. You know, they need these small markets when the large market is left out. It is this, they are also related, the immobility in China and the international mobility are also interrelated in the sense they are both development strategies. In both spheres, places, accumulation were taking place. Of course, in China is accumulation via e-mobility through command economy and etc. But in the West is accumulation through mobility of capital and through mobility of labor, and the so-called the new international division of labor. I mean, also internationalization of production in Saskia Sisson's term. They're both accumulation. And that is important to me because this explains why there is a rise of reproduction migration from China and why. This is a minor point, but important for my argument, is why do I think that reproduction migration from China started almost from the very beginning, the end of the 1970s, with China-US bilateral agreement about educational migration. The accumulation was done in China. So this means when China opened up, so-called China joined the world system, China did not simply join the system, the pre-given and established system. Actually, China joined in a new way, new form. They did not join just by following the logic of accumulation. They join to a great extent, actually, through a logic, what I call the conversion. Wealth capital has always been accumulated in China, and the migration is a way to convert what has been accumulated in China into something else. And there is a change here. How the conversion is taking place and what is being converted to changed over the last 30, 40 years. I mean, that is very clear if you look at education migration, international students. There are 4 generations, and we can talk about later. And also, of course, investor migrants did not exist until, I think, the category did not exist until the late 1990s. And then China became a bigger player is only in 2010s, over the last 10 years or so. So there is a nuanced change there. But I want to say that if you look at migration, use the term reproduction migration in a broader sense, probably we can say in the end of the 1970s, when China resumed external links, and especially from 1986, when China allowed citizens to apply for private passports. You can see the migration is to different ways, always reproduction migration. But now it is became more and more obvious, right? I mean, probably I just to finish my presentation today, I just give one example actually related to myself. When I go overseas to study, I mean, consider 4 generations of students, migrants from PRC. Generation 1 is above me, sent by the government, scholarship. They're supposed to return to China, but hardly any returned. And as they went overseas, thinking, okay, the West, of course, is the future. Science is more advanced, and also the political system is more advanced. We should learn from them. It's quite liberally oriented. And then my generation is not by sent by government, is often went overseas as postgraduate students on scholarships provided by foreign universities, driven by the desire for better science and also for better personal life. It is quite individualized already. Third generation below us became younger, not postgraduate students only, and more undergraduate students, and financed by family, and go overseas for symbolic values, have better degree, to have better job. So no much faith in better science or better system. And then you have, you can see it's very instrumentalized by the third generation. And now the fourth generation, they go overseas very young. Of course, we know there is so-called birth tourism, right, phenomenon, and people who now is becoming tightened. The regulation became very tightened. They go to the US to give birth and etc. As young as before the baby is born, they start migrating already. For what? It's one of my relatives. They plan to send the children overseas, and the mother told me, "We are Nancy. I mean, we don't have any ambition that we want our daughter to be outstanding. We just want the daughter to have a normal life, to be normal, to be happy, have a happy childhood, which is not available in China because of competition, right? So this is another thing. Reproduction became a very competitive game in China. You must buy certain house, you must go certain school, etc. So just to be happy life, to be go back to the very basic. Of course, you pay lots of money, go overseas to pursue that goal. So there is it's really go back to the concern about the life itself. Of course, not the biological life. It's about happiness and mental health and etc. Of course, it's related to status and class relation too. So that's my main argument here. So I hope that by taking reproduction migration as a trope to explain the phenomenon why people keep leaving China when China become an economic center in the world, I hope we can do a couple of things. Number one, it can to re-examine the relation between China and the world. Number two, actually, is to also to re-examine the history of China's economic development. How the accumulation regime changed. And then the question of conversion, right? I also wanted to be part of the story. It's not only accumulation. So that is a second about China's history and China's relation to the world. And thirdly, I hope that this concept will also enable us to rethink the meaning of migration. the movement of people, what it means exactly, because I have worked on migration for so long, and you have inevitably fatigue. I mean, migrants' experiences are always complex, etc. Right? But if you reduce everything to individual experiences, then I mean, you can write a lot, but probably you say very little. So whether or not we can think of their migratory experiences and especially the strategies in a more analytical term and link that to larger political economy. I don't know whether or not it works, the third point. So it's a very, it's even less certain. I'm even less certain about the third point than I am about the first 2 points. Yeah. So I stop here. So I very much look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much. What a wonderful talk. There's so much to dig into there.